The courtroom was quiet, but the tension was sharp enough to slice through stone. All eyes were on the man standing in front of the judge, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 50s. His polished shoes, pressed navy blazer, and straight posture spoke of discipline, but it was the small, gleaming set of medals pinned above his heart that drew the attention of the entire room. "Mr. Daniels," Judge Ronald Kessler said, peering over his glasses with a disapproving scowl, "this is a courtroom, not a parade." The silence tightened. Mr. Daniels didn't flinch. He remained calm, unmoved by the remark. The judge leaned back in his chair, sighing loudly. "Remove the medals," Kessler ordered. "This isn't a military function. It's disrespectful to wear them in here." A murmur rose among the people in attendance. Some exchanged glances. Others simply stared. Mr. Daniels raised an eyebrow but said nothing. His attorney, a younger woman in a gray suit named Melanie Ortiz, turned sharply toward the bench. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "those medals are not decorative. They are his legal military honors. Federal law permits a veteran to wear them at formal proceedings." Kessler's lips curled. "Not in my courtroom." The words echoed, not loud, but final. Dismissive. Dangerous. Mr. Daniels remained still. Calm. But his eyes were locked onto the judge's, not in defiance, but in warning. He had been silent for a reason. And that silence was about to end. Melanie hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between the judge and her client. But Mr. Daniels gave a slight nod, permission to proceed. "Your Honor," she repeated more firmly, "with respect, Mr. Daniels served 3 tours overseas. Those medals are not props. They represent real acts of valor, recognized and protected under federal law." Kessler slammed his gavel once, hard. "This is not a debate," he snapped. "I gave a lawful order. If Mr. Daniels wants to remain in this courtroom, he will remove those decorations." Gasps echoed from the gallery. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Still, Mr. Daniels didn't move. His voice finally cut through the air, low, calm, precise. "Judge Kessler," he said, "those medals were earned in combat, under fire, while protecting this nation, and the very right for this court to exist." There was a pause. "You don't have the authority to strip me of that. And you know it." For a moment, the judge looked stunned. Then his face turned red with restrained fury. "You're held in contempt," he barked. "Bailiff," but the bailiff hesitated. His hand hovered near his belt, but he didn't move toward Daniels. "Sir," the bailiff said carefully, "I think we should pause for a moment." "Why?" Kessler snapped. The bailiff leaned toward the bench and whispered urgently. The judge's face shifted, confusion, then irritation, then something else. Unease. The whisper was brief, but it carried weight. Kessler looked back toward Daniels, who still stood tall, unmoving. Something was happening. Something the judge hadn't anticipated. He was about to learn exactly who he was dealing with. Judge Kessler's fingers tightened around his gavel, but he didn't bring it down again. The courtroom had shifted. The authority he wielded so confidently moments ago now felt brittle. Fragile. Mr. Daniels remained composed, but the room was watching him differently now. Not as a defendant. Not even as a veteran. As someone more. "Mr. Daniels," Kessler said, his voice now edged with forced civility, "this court." Before he could finish, the double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 men in dark suits entered silently. Not local deputies. Not reporters. They wore discreet pins on their lapels, unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. Federal. Melanie Ortiz straightened. She recognized them instantly. Judge Kessler blinked, flustered. "Excuse me," he said, "this is a closed." One of the men stepped forward and presented a leather badge folder without a word. Kessler froze mid-sentence. His mouth opened, then closed. "Mr. Daniels," the man said respectfully, "we're here on behalf of the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. Per directive, your presence was authorized under federal protection." Kessler's complexion went pale. "You, what?" The agent turned to him. "Judge Kessler, did you knowingly instruct a decorated U.S. combat veteran, currently serving as a liaison to the Pentagon's Legal Oversight Committee, to remove federally sanctioned honors during an open legal proceeding?" The courtroom gasped. Even the court reporter's fingers stopped moving. Melanie stared forward, jaw clenched, victorious but silent. Judge Kessler's voice cracked. I wasn't made aware." "That's correct," Mr. Daniels interrupted calmly. "You didn't ask." The room was now dead silent. And Kessler realized too late, he hadn't just insulted a veteran. He had humiliated a federal military official under public record. Judge Kessler visibly shrank behind the bench, his posture no longer commanding, now defensive. The agent continued, his voice measured but firm. "There will be a formal inquiry, Judge. Effective immediately." Kessler's face twitched. "Inquiry? This is absurd. I was enforcing decorum." "My courtroom, you may want to stop talking," the second agent said quietly. "Everything you say from this point forward is being documented." The gallery was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. What had started as a routine hearing had turned into a reckoning. Mr. Daniels remained still, hands calmly clasped in front of him. Melanie finally spoke. "Your Honor, I move for dismissal of all citations against Mr. Daniels, and a full review of the court transcript for misconduct." Kessler opened his mouth, but no words came out. One of the agents stepped forward, holding a small recording device. "Judge Kessler, we've been instructed to escort you for a preliminary review. This courtroom is now under temporary federal supervision." The bailiff didn't move to stop them. In fact, he took a step back. 2 minutes later, in front of a stunned audience, Judge Ronald Kessler was quietly led out of his own courtroom. No gavel. No announcement. Just silence. As the doors closed behind him, Mr. Daniels turned slightly toward Melanie and gave a nod. He hadn't raised his voice once. He didn't need to. Some battles are won without firing a shot. But when you've earned every stripe the hard way, sometimes, your silence speaks louder than the law. The courtroom remained hushed long after Judge Kessler was escorted out. No one dared speak first, not the attorneys, not the clerks, not even the gallery. It was as if the entire room had collectively realized they had witnessed something historic. Something irreversible. "Mr. Daniels slowly took his seat beside Melanie. She leaned in. "They didn't even blink," she whispered. "They came in like they already knew how this would end." Daniels gave a faint smile. "They did." Moments later, a court administrator, a senior official from the State Judicial Board, entered the room, adjusting her glasses and looking around. "I have been instructed to formally adjourn this session," she announced. "All matters involving Mr. Daniels are hereby dismissed pending review, and the bench will remain vacant until further notice." A murmur returned to the courtroom, but it was a different kind now, respectful, even reverent. Outside, reporters had already begun to gather. Word was spreading. A judge removed mid-proceeding. A veteran standing his ground without shouting, threatening, or raising a fist. Just presence. Just truth. As they exited the building, Melanie turned to him. "You really weren't going to say anything, were you? If they hadn't pushed." Mr. Daniels paused at the top of the courthouse steps. "I don't ask for respect," he said. "I just won't tolerate disrespect, especially in a place that claims to stand for justice." He adjusted his blazer, the metals still gleaming in the afternoon sun. Then he added, without ego, just quiet certainty, "I've buried friends for less." The crowd outside watched as he walked down the steps, unshaken and undefeated. And somewhere behind him, Judge Kessler's legacy was already beginning to crumble. Weeks passed. News of the courtroom incident spread beyond the city, picked up by national outlets and veteran advocacy groups. Headlines didn't scream, they respected. They told the story the way the moment deserved, calm, serious, undeniable. Judge removed after disrespecting decorated combat veteran in court, medals, honor, and consequences. Courtroom controversy sparks national policy review, veteran's silent stand prompts judicial ethics investigation. Judge Kessler was placed on indefinite administrative leave. Behind closed doors, an internal review found a pattern of conduct, small aggressions, unchecked ego, and an unwillingness to adapt. That incident with Mr. Daniels had simply been the last straw. Officially, Kessler announced his early retirement. Unofficially, it was over the moment he told a man with a silver star and 2 bronze stars that his medals disrupted his courtroom. Meanwhile, Mr. Daniels quietly returned to his advisory role in Washington. He gave no interviews. Refused speaking engagements. Declined invitations to appear on television. When pressed for comment, he issued only one written statement: "I didn't stand up for myself in that courtroom. I stood up for every service member who's ever been told their sacrifice is inconvenient." Behind the scenes, new legislation was quietly introduced, the Veterans Recognition in Civil Proceedings Act, a bill reinforcing protections for military honors in all legal settings. Melanie Ortiz went on to write about the case in a legal journal. It was titled, "The Courtroom, the Medal, and the Man Who Changed Everything Without Saying a Word." Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing medals. Months later, a bronze plaque was quietly installed in the lobby of the very courthouse where it all happened. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. No grand speeches. Just a simple inscription, "In honor of all who served, and stood." Dedicated to those who wear their honor with quiet strength. It didn't mention Mr. Daniels by name. But everyone in that city knew who it was for. Inside the building, things had changed. Judges spoke more carefully. Attorneys paid more attention. Bailiffs now received additional training, not just in security, but in respect and protocol when it came to veterans, dignitaries, and protected individuals. The case became required reading in judicial ethics courses. Law schools debated it. Military academies cited it. And veterans, especially those often overlooked, felt seen. As for Judge Kessler, he withdrew completely from public life. Rumors circled about offers to speak, write, or even host legal commentary shows. He declined them all. When asked years later what he remembered most about that day, a former clerk quoted him, "It wasn't the medals. It was the silence. The kind that tells you, you made a mistake too big to walk back." And as for Mr. Daniels, he remained exactly where he wanted to be, out of the spotlight, working quietly behind closed doors, helping build bridges between military service and civilian justice. He didn't need applause. He already had something better, dignity. And that, unlike a courtroom title, doesn't come with a term limit. Nearly a year to the day after the courtroom incident, Mr. Daniels returned, not for a hearing, not for a statement, not for revenge. Just to sit in the gallery. He arrived unannounced. No security detail. No media. Just the same calm presence, wearing a suit and his medals, the same ones that had nearly gotten him thrown out. A new judge now sat on the bench, Judge Elaine Harper. Younger, steady, and widely respected for her fairness. She spotted him the moment she entered. She nodded once in his direction. No fanfare. Just acknowledgement. That day's docket included a military veteran navigating a property dispute after a deployment. Mr. Daniels listened quietly from the back row as the court handled it with care, patience, and full recognition of the man's service. When the hearing ended, Judge Harper stood. She looked toward Daniels. "Before we adjourn," she said gently, I'd like to recognize a guest in the courtroom, someone whose quiet strength reminded us what justice should look like." The room turned. But Mr. Daniels simply rose, gave a respectful nod to the bench, and left. No words. No interview. Just presence, again. As the doors closed behind him, a young law student sitting in the front whispered to her mentor, "Who was that?" The mentor smiled. "He's the reason we're all sitting straighter now." Weeks later, a package arrived at the federal courthouse. No return address. Inside, wrapped in navy cloth, was a single medal, the Silver Star. Attached was a handwritten note in careful block letters: "This was earned in battle, but the real fight happened here. Return it to the wall, so others remember where courage belongs." Judge Harper, upon reading it, requested a meeting with the court board. Within a month, a glass case was installed just outside courtroom 3B, the same room where the confrontation had unfolded. Inside the case, the Silver Star, a folded American flag, and a small brass placard that read, "Honor isn't given by the court. It's brought in by those who earned it." Visitors now paused at that display every day. Lawyers, students, veterans, judges. Some took photos. Others simply stared. But one morning, a young Marine in uniform stood there longer than the rest. A janitor noticed and approached quietly. "You okay, son?" The Marine didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I was starting to think people forgot what this meant. But now I know someone remembered for all of us." He saluted the case, and walked into his first hearing with his medals on. No one questioned it. No one would again. The legacy lives, justice wasn't just restored. Years passed. The story of what happened in courtroom 3B became something more than just a legal case. It turned into a lesson, told in law schools, passed around military bases, and quietly shared among courtroom staff across the country. They called it the Daniels Standard. A simple idea: never confuse silence for weakness. Never mistake medals for decoration. And never forget that dignity outranks power. Judge Harper went on to serve with distinction. Every new judge sworn into the district court received a small booklet during their orientation, a plain blue folder titled Professional Conduct and Military Protocol. Inside, on the first page, was a quote attributed simply to a veteran: "The court doesn't give honor, but it should know when it's in the presence of it." As for Mr. Daniels, he was never seen in that courtroom again. Not because he stayed away, but because he didn't have to return. His presence had done what rulings, sanctions, or speeches never could. It changed how people thought. And somewhere, in a quiet office with no nameplate, he kept doing what he always did, advising from the shadows, supporting without headlines, and ensuring the values he fought for were carried forward, not just in battlefields, but in courtrooms. In the end, it wasn't a gavel that made history. It was the quiet stand of a man in uniform, and the moment a courtroom finally listened.